Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Reiser in for Vladimir Duthier. We're watching all the news happening in the U.S. and around the world. If it's happening, we're going to bring it to you live. This is CBS News 24/7. Dangerously high temperatures across the country are triggering heat warnings right now for millions of people. We're tracking the forecast. Former President Trump faces a superseding indictment for allegedly attempting to overturn the 2020 election following the Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity. What's included and what's not. And a landing mishap and another launch delayed. We're at Kennedy Space Center for the latest on SpaceX troubles. We start with the weather. A late summer heat wave is making its way from the Midwest to the Northeast with real field temperatures in some places hitting more than 100 degrees. CBS News correspondent Lilia Luciano is in Brooklyn, New York, where things are already heating up. Lilia, what is it like and what can we expect?
Well, Lizzie, right now, I'll tell you, it's a pleasant 80 degrees, feels like 85, but today temperatures here in Brooklyn and across New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, many areas are due for a heat advisory. It's going to go up to 100 or at least feels like 102 degrees here. Further south in New Jersey, where we're going to be, it's expected to feel like 103 degrees. And that just shows you the volatility of this kind of weather. Of course, the humidity adds between 5 and 10 degrees. And I say volatile because yesterday the story was in Chicago, where my colleague Roxana Saberi was experiencing 99 degrees. And today the height of that is going to be around 80. So as you said, I mean, it's late in the summer, but it sure is something that's being felt. We're going to be talking to some student athletes in New Jersey because, of course, school is back on and students are preparing. There's a great deal of concern for how to keep safe, not just for the elderly in cities and places like New York City, like Brooklyn, where I am, where you have all of this cement that's really trapping the heat, but also, as I said, for school athletes who are out there in the elements, in the heat. There's schools that started practices at 7 a.m. Early this morning, and schools that are just not having sports today because of these concerns.
You know, Lilia, I grew up in Phoenix where, 110 is the normal in summer. And at the time, I thought, man, all these people on the East Coast, they're complaining about 99 degrees. But really, when you live here, you do realize, that place, Phoenix, is built for the heat. You go into your car in air conditioning, you go into a building in air conditioning. Not the case necessarily in some parts of the East Coast. This is why some schools were closed. They just don't have the air conditioning infrastructure.
That's a huge concern. And that's the big difference. As you said, of course, Arizona is ready for this. That's also dry heat. Humidity makes it much hotter than what you're seeing in the metrics. But what happens here is exactly that. Not everybody has AC, and the use of AC heats the street, heats the cement. Not everybody has it. That's why they're urging older folks, especially the unhoused community population here in New York, to use the cooling centers that might be available, to find a pool. Of course, people are at work, stay at work, stay protected in AC, and the temperatures are just going to keep going up throughout the day. We're looking at possibly a 20 degree difference between now and peak heat at 2 p.m.
Wow. Okay, Lilia, thank you so much for bringing this to us. Stay safe. Let's bring in to CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with a look at the national forecast. Grant, our colleague Anne Marie was talking about pumpkin spice in the last hour. Clearly, Mother Nature not getting that cue from Starbucks.
No, somebody needs to let Mother Nature know, like, hello, it's almost September here. We need to start getting into that whole field. But no, it seems like pumpkin spice season is a long way away, especially for these 55 million people that are underneath some sort of heat alert today, be it a heat advisory or what we're dealing with in the Philadelphia area, which is an excessive heat warning, not so much because of the actual temperature, but because of that real feel or that heat index, where we could have feels like temperatures approaching 105 to even 108 degrees in some places. But the actual temperature Going to be rivaling some records today. Washington, D.C. looking at a forecast high of 99 degrees. The record today in D.C. is 98 degrees. Raleigh, North Carolina, 97. The record's 100 degrees. 97 in Louisville. Record is right there at 97 degrees. You continue to go down the list. I mean, it is a hot, it is a humid day, but it's also a dangerous day when you start talking about how that heat really does have an impact on our bodies. You see those forecast highs across much of the Mid-South up into the Northeast. Upper 90s, near 100 degrees. Feels like temperatures in the triple digits. There will be some relief, though, coming. Thank goodness to the Northeast. Meanwhile, the heat continues back into Kentucky and Tennessee over the next couple of days. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Former President Trump is lashing out over the indictment he's facing in the D.C. election subversion case. A federal grand jury handed up the superseding indictment yesterday afternoon. Special counsel Jack Smith reworked and slimmed down the allegations in light of the Supreme Court's immunity ruling, but it still accuses Trump of trying to overturn the election results in 2020. Trump has repeatedly denied all wrongdoing. CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Coffin joins me now from Washington. Katrina, good to see you. How is Trump responding?
Good morning, Lindsay. For one, Trump immediately began fundraising off this new indictment. That's something that we saw him do in the past with success, and within hours he had sent out an email to his supporters calling this a hoax and asking them to donate. We also saw him lash out, as you mentioned, on Truth Social. He put up a series of posts saying that this is election interference. It's just meant to distract from the problems of Kamala Harris. He pointed out that he thinks that Jack Smith has been illegally appointed, which is a finding in his Florida classified documents case, even though that doesn't apply in D.C. And we also heard a response from his running mate, J.D. Vance, which we can play.
I don't think that it changes anything legally. I think it's clearly an effort to try to do more election interference from Jack Smith. He should be ashamed of himself, and it's one of the reasons why we have to win, because he should not be anywhere near power.
So we hear J.D. Vance reiterating that he thinks this is election interference. He doesn't think that this indictment is any different from the original one. And he makes the point that if he and Trump are elected, they can effectively direct the Department of Justice to dismiss these charges and Jack Smith, just eliminating this case altogether.
So certainly not different maybe in substance or significance, Katrina, but you were among our colleagues feverishly going through this indictment when it dropped yesterday, comparing it to the original indictment. How do they compare and contrast? So Jack Smith has really reframed this superseding indictment. And what's significant about it is visible from the very beginning. Rather than talking about Donald Trump as the president of the United States, he refers to him as a candidate for president and also emphasizes that he lost that 2020 election. And we see this as a through line throughout the superseding indictment. He is talking about Trump's actions related to his candidate campaigning for president, not his official acts as president. If he's making a speech, for example, it's emphasized that that was an act related to the campaign. We see that Mike Pence is referred to as Trump's running mate and the president of the Senate, not as the vice president, taking it out of the realm of the executive branch. So we really see Jack Smith looking at the Supreme Court immunity ruling and only maintaining the allegations that he thinks would fall under the umbrella of unofficial conduct. He does, however, manage to maintain the 4 core charges against Donald Trump. Lindsay, I think it's also important to note that just this week, on Monday and Tuesday, Jack Smith has made this effort to resurrect both federal cases against Donald Trump. On Monday, he filed in the 11th Circuit trying to overturn the dismissal of the Florida classified documents case. And then yesterday, we were all surprised with this superseding indictment in the D.C. election interference case. Katrina, thank you.
Thank you.
Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson weighed in on the court's immunity decision handed down in July. She did so during an exclusive interview with my colleague, CBS Evening anchor and managing editor Norah O'Donnell, before the publication of her new memoir, Lovely One. Justice Jackson discussed her scathing dissent in the landmark case.
In your dissent, you wrote that the court declared for the first time in history that the most powerful official in the United States can, under circumstances yet to be fully determined, become a law unto himself. It sounds like a warning.
Well, I mean, that was my view of what the court determined.
you were concerned about broad immunity?
I was concerned about a system that appeared to provide immunity for one individual under one set of circumstances, when we have a criminal justice system that had ordinarily treated everyone the same.
Are you prepared that this election could end up before the Supreme Court?
As prepared as anyone can be. Let me ask you, are you prepared for all of the news cycles that you're getting as a result of this election?
No.
No, exactly. I mean, I think there are legal issues that arise out of the political process. And so the Supreme Court has to be prepared to respond if that should be necessary.
You can see more of Nora's interview with Justice Jackson this weekend on CBS Sunday Morning. Breaking overnight, never-before-seen documentary footage of Nancy Pelosi responding to the January 6th insurrection. This new footage has been released, and CBS News obtained the video after HBO turned it over to Congress. The footage was filmed as Pelosi was being evacuated from the Capitol.
How many times did the members ask, are we prepared? Are we prepared? We're not. Prepared for the worst. We're calling the National Guard now. We should have been here to start out. Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient
No,
resources.
that is not a question of how they have. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
I want to bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland for more on this. Scott, I mean, she appears to me, from my vantage point, pretty incensed, understandably, at what is happening. Our Capitol was under siege. What are we seeing from this new footage? Most importantly, what are we learning?
Awful lot of threads to pull on here, Lindsay. This set of video released by a House Congressional Committee, video obtained from HBO and shared with CBS News. So Nancy Pelosi in the footage is heard viscerally frustrated by this calamitous failure of security. She blasts the congressional security officials who failed that day, including the Capitol Police Chief and the House Sergeant at Arms, both of whom were removed from their jobs or left their jobs in the hours after the January 6th attack. She is viscerally frustrated with Donald Trump, calling him a domestic enemy, saying a price must be paid for what he did and didn't do on January 6th, and even talks in this video about a prompt impeachment. All of this underscores what the House January 6th Select Committee found and released to the public 2 years ago, that Donald Trump, for 3 hours, didn't move to call back his supporters who were attacking the Capitol and attacking police, didn't move on getting the National Guard deployed, which only his administration could do, local officials couldn't, and that gap had such consequences for America. Nancy Pelosi lending new face and voice to those frustrations in this newly released video.
Scott, do you think this will come up in the election cycle, maybe particularly when we see the vice presidential debate between Vance and Walz? Because we know that Vance and many Republicans have tried to seize on the fact that Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, in their view, was slow to call up the state guard in responding to some of the riots that we saw in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. I haven't seen this particular part brought up as a rebuttal. Do you think that that will change now that we have this footage?
No, it's a good point. I think this will come up in several different ways at both the presidential debate September 10th and the vice presidential debate on CBS News October 1st. There are all different ways to come at this, including the one you just described. Possible J.D. Vance is asked, would you do what you thought Mike Pence should do if you're the sitting vice president on January 6, 2029? You also could see Donald Trump being asked about some of his failures from January 6th during the presidential debate. But there was that key kernel, that one little clip you played of Nancy Pelosi acknowledging she should have had the security officials more prepared. Two quick things about that. First of all, it's quite possible Trump hooks onto that to defend his own failures January 6th, ascribing blame to Nancy Pelosi. But I also add this context. Nancy Pelosi was not the only person responsible for congressional security that day. The Senate Majority Leader was too. On January 6, 2021, that was a Republican, Mitch McConnell.
Scott McFarland will end it right there. Thank you. Israeli troops conducted raids overnight in the West Bank. It's part of a major offensive that is targeting Palestinian militants. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tayeb has more from Israel.
Well, there's an extremely alarming situation unfolding in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, where Israel has launched what it's described as a major operation in a number of Palestinian towns and refugee camps across the West Bank. We understand that Israeli forces have sealed entire areas, including Tulkarm and refugee camps like Jenin. And we understand that the situation on the ground is extremely volatile. Now, of course, we've been paying so much attention to Gaza over the last nearly 11 months as the war there grinds on and the Palestinian death toll exceeds over 40,000. But in the occupied West Bank, over 650 Palestinians have been killed in confrontations not only with the Israeli military, but also with Jewish Israeli settlers who live in settlements which are described as illegal under international law. Now, all of this tension has really reached what we're seeing now, which is a boiling point, which many people fear could lead to something even more serious than what we're seeing now. Still, Israeli forces say that they're on the ground and that they have been battling against militants, but the situation is extremely volatile. Lindsay.
Imtiaz, thank you. Vice President Harris and her running mate will kick off a bus tour in Georgia today, their first joint campaign stop since the Democratic National Convention. Ahead, a look at how the pair plan to sway voters in this crucial battleground state. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate Tim Walz are hitting the road in the battleground state of Georgia. The pair will begin a bus tour through the Peach State today that will end with a rally in Savannah tomorrow. Any moment now, Governor Walz will speak at the International Federation of Firefighters Convention. That's in Boston before he heads to Georgia this afternoon. Joining me right now for more is CBS News campaign reporter Aaron Navarro. Aaron, can you please talk about the significance of Governor Walz addressing this union in Boston?
Well, it's part of an argument that the Harris campaign is making that they are the candidate for labor unions. Walz himself is a former teacher union member, and at his remarks in Boston, he's expected to tout some of the emergency worker acts that Biden and Harris passed during their time in the White House, as well as talk about what he's done for unions in Minnesota. There are about 2.7 million union voters in the battleground specifically. And while they have historically gone Democratic, while the leadership has backed Harris since she's been the candidate, it's those rank and file members in Pennsylvania and Michigan that Democrats and especially the Harris campaign need to convince to have in their corner if they want to win those states.
Aaron, this is Harris's 7th trip to Georgia just this year. Why is the Harris-Walz campaign making the state a central focus? She also released several new ads before the tour. So what messaging are they focusing on?
Well, when it comes to Georgia, it's, of course, the state Biden won in 2020. Yes, he had Senate races kind of helping boost the energy and momentum in the state. But for Republicans and former President Trump, it's really hard to see a path to 270 electoral college votes without this state of Georgia. And throughout the cycle, it has leaned towards Trump's column. In polling, it seems that it is more of an even dead heat heading into this next month. As far as the ads, we started the week with a focus on Harris's economic plan, on what she would do on price gouging, on affordable housing. But today, they announced that there will be a new ad running from Labor Day all the way until Election Day in November, focused on Project 2025. That is a sort of conservative blueprint created by an outside group that they are looking to tie to former President Trump.
Harris and Walz will sit down for their first joint interview after the rally in Savannah on Thursday. What more do we know about the significance of this? And does this sort of put to rest some of the Republican criticism that particularly Harris hasn't sat down for an interview since becoming the top of the ticket?
Well, I'm sure Republicans will argue that she needs to sit down more with press not just CNN, who is going to be conducting the interview on Thursday. But Harris, has been answering shouted questions at her and the tarmac in between her campaign travels. But this will be the first sit-down interview. And Republicans have been criticizing that Governor Tim Walz, her running mate, will be a part of it. But it sounds like voters don't really necessarily care about that. But this will be their first time seeing Harris take and answer independent questions.
Aaron, thank you. Former President Donald Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, is set to head to Erie, Pennsylvania for a speech on energy and the economy before he makes his way to De Pere, Wisconsin. So joining me right now for more on this is CBS News campaign reporter Olivia Rinaldi. Olivia, we have seen the Trump campaign really lean into Vance, especially in these Midwestern swing states. How is the campaign utilizing him, and what message is he looking to get across today?
Yeah, Lindsay, the focus of J.D. Vance is really an economic message. That's why you see him going back to places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the former blue wall states that flipped for Trump in 2016 and then flipped back for Biden in 2020. These are the crucial voters that they need in this part of the country. And they feel like Vance can speak to them because of his background, given that he's from Ohio, Midwest roots, and he can speak to kind of the erosion of jobs and what his experience was growing up in sort of that area, and how manufacturing jobs perhaps went overseas and left some of these towns and communities a little bit desolate. So he's kind of being deployed there to talk about that sort of economic message, high prices, inflation, all of those sorts of things. And he's also kind of priming the way for former President Donald Trump. So Vance, as you mentioned today, is in Pennsylvania and then Wisconsin. He was in Michigan earlier in the week. Former President Donald Trump will be going to Michigan tomorrow, then on to Wisconsin, where I will be for a town hall. And then he's going to end the week in Pennsylvania for a rally. So really putting the importance on those blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And Lindsay, and I expect we will see them there a lot more going into November.
Olivia, one piece of news we're hearing more about is an alleged dispute between the campaign and Arlington Cemetery officials after Trump's visit there on Monday. What are both sides saying happened?
So we do know from both sides that there was some sort of interaction. That is what we know. Last night, staffers and people at Arlington National Cemetery put out a statement where they said, we can confirm there was an incident and a report was filed because of that. We know from the Trump campaign side that they tell us they were explicitly granted approval to be at Section 60 of the cemetery. Now, the background of all of this is that Donald Trump was at Arlington National Cemetery on Monday on the anniversary of the Abbey Gate bombing. That was a terrorist bombing that happened at Kabul airport when Americans were leaving Afghanistan in the final days. 13 service members were killed. It was a very dark day. Trump was there honoring those families. He was there on behalf of their invite. Section 60 is the area of the cemetery where veterans and those who perished and lost their lives in the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan are laid to rest. It's a very solemn, hallowed ground for them to be. Trump went at their behest to Section 60. We know there was some sort of interaction between a staffer at Arlington National Cemetery and someone on the Trump campaign, and this was around whether or not they could take photos and videos while being there. The Trump campaign says they were given explicit approval by the families, the Gold Star families, about being there and taking those photos. Arlington National Cemetery has a long-standing rule that it's hollowed ground, so you're not allowed to take photos and videos there. So a lot of details coming out about this. We are trying to sift through those details, and we will have the facts and the reporting to back this up.
Throughout the day, Olivia, thank you so much. A person in New Hampshire has died from a rare mosquito-borne illness that hasn't been seen there in a decade. What you need to know about this illness and the precautions you can take. This mosquito is a little too big for my comfort in this monitor. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. To take you now to Boston, where Minnesota Governor and Democratic Vice Presidential nominee Tim Walz is addressing the International Association of Firefighters. Let's listen.
I got attacked by the Wall Street Journal for being richer than my disclosure says because I have 2 defined benefit pension plans. Seems like that's a little different than Google stock that was handed to you, but that's what we did. So maybe a few more of us should be dues-paying members. But I can promise you this. When Vice President Harris and I win this election, we'll have your back just like you've had ours this entire time. And just as I've done as governor and just as the vice president has done, I look forward to working hand in hand with you to deliver for the locals back home, because that's what really matters. But if you'd bear with me, it's a privilege to be in front of this group, but I have to say it's also personal. The Minnesotans know this, and some of you in this room might know. Last year, we lost one of our bravest firefighting heroes, and I personally lost a dear friend. Chris Parsons was fire captain from St. Paul. He worked closely with us and was president of the Minnesota Professional Firefighters. Chris was 6'7", stood out in any crowd, but it's hard to imagine his personality was bigger than that 6'7". He was the most generous and kind and funny individual that I had ever met. One conversation with that guy would make your entire day better. Tragically, we lost Chris in the line of duty. It's kind of heartbreak that no family and no community should have to endure, because every hero deserves to come home at the end of every shift. And know this, we see your noble courage. We're forever grateful to you for going above and beyond to keep all of us safe. And we're committed to building a future that you and your families deserve. As Minnesota's governor, I was proud to bolster resources for firefighter training and education, to invest in the equipment and the facilities to keep you safe, and to sign the most comprehensive fighter well-being legislation in the nation.
We have been listening to Governor Walz address this firefighters union in Boston. He brought up a Wall Street Journal report from about 6 days ago saying he was richer than his disclosures suggested. He said it was because of pensions that he got as a dues-paying member. He's told the firefighters, a part of the International Association of Firefighters, you have had our backs and we will have your backs. Of course, union workers have been a big part of who Harris and Walz have been trying to draw in for their support. We'll continue to monitor this in our control room and bring you any updates as they come in. Russia continues to launch a barrage of missiles across Ukraine, and the United Nations nuclear watchdog is warning of danger. Our Ramy Inocencio has more from London now. Ramy, what can you tell us?
Hi there, good to see you. And yeah, the hometown of Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, was hit again by a Russian missile. This is in the central city of Kryvyi Rih. It's the second time in 2 days, in fact, and people were observing and still are observing an official day mourning for that first attack, which killed 4 people. Now, in today's strike, 4 people were wounded there. But all of this we know is coming after the past couple days of what is being described as really one of, Lindsay, if not the biggest barrages of Russian airstrikes on Ukraine since this war began more than 900 days ago. And this is happening with Russia still dealing with those Ukrainian troops, those new troops, right, on Russian soil after they breached the border about 3 weeks ago. Ukrainian soldiers are now reportedly only about 25 miles away from Russia's Kursk nuclear power plant. And yesterday, as you just mentioned, the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog said that the danger of a nuclear accident has now emerged. That was from Rafael Grossi, who you're seeing on the screen right there. He's the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency. He was touring the plant yesterday. He said Kursk was, quote unquote, extremely exposed to attack and protected, get this, only by a normal roof. And at the same time, Russia says that it defused unexploded ordnance that included U.S. supplied munitions nearby in that area. And as for the Kremlin, they've dismissed talks of another Ukrainian peace plan. That's coming from President Zelensky. He said he would present that plan to President Biden, and he was also looking ahead to the future past the U.S. presidential election to both of his 2 possible successors, saying he would also present the plan to them, of course, namely Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump.
Okay, Ramy, thank you. Our other top story we're tracking today is the heat across the nation. So let's go to CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore. Grant?
Hey, good morning, Lindsay. Good morning to you at home. Over 55 million people across the Midwestern states and then up into the Northeast are waking up underneath some sort of heat alert today. Waking up with temperatures, as you can see, they're in the low and mid 80s already. Plenty of sunshine out there, though. Chicago finally starting to get some relief after a couple of days of some big heat. But Let's talk about this because this is excessively hot temperatures. I mentioned 55 million people potentially succumbing to the impacts of heat-related illnesses. And that's why this is an important thing to pass along to you, especially in the Philadelphia area where we have an excessive heat warning in effect, where feels like temperatures will be not just approaching the triple digits, but anywhere between 100 to 107 degrees, and a time of year when, one, kids are going back to school. 63 schools right in the Philadelphia area alone are getting out of school early because they don't have air conditioning. This late summer heat wave has been really plaguing much of the Midwestern states for the last couple of days, and now it's been moving to the east. Places like D.C. today, rivaling a record high temperature. 100 degrees is the forecast high. Feels like temperatures around 106 with that humidity. Even down in Nashville, temperatures around 101. Feels like temperatures 101 degrees. A little bit of relief on the way forward tomorrow. Not only heat, but also the threat for some severe weather following behind that heat from the Ohio Valley into the Northeast. I do want to mention this. Up in portions of Montana, heat isn't your thing. Maybe some snow? Yeah. How about some late August snow falling across parts of the Montana Rocky Mountains today, where it's ongoing right now. Some places up that way, up towards Glacier National Park in the higher elevations, Lindsay, could see a good 2 to 4 inches of snow. So it's not all summer across the country, a little bit of winter weather as well.
Wild. All right, Grant, thank you. Well, one place we're not reporting snow. You just mentioned the Northeast. Heat advisories in place across New York City and much of New Jersey. Feels like temperatures are expected to climb above 100 degrees. Elijah Westbrook from CBS News New York has more.
Good morning. Well, right now we are here in downtown Hoboken, one of the areas here in New Jersey and just in the tri-state region that's expected to undergo a heat advisory. The National Weather Service issuing a heat advisory between the hours of 11 a.m. till 8 o'clock tonight, and that is specifically for all of New York City and, again, certain portions of New Jersey. Now, you certainly want to be prepared for the hot temperatures that are expected to arise later on today. Of course, you want to stay hydrated if you can, wear loose fitted clothing, and also, take advantage of the fact that the temperatures are cooler now. So if there's any sort of outdoor activities that you would like to partake in, do it now while the temperatures are a little bit lower than what they are expected to be in the hours ahead. That is the latest at this time. From Hoboken, New Jersey, Elijah Westbrook, CBS News, New York.
Well, one man has died in New Hampshire after contracting a mosquito-borne illness known as Triple E. This is the state's first human case of eastern equine encephalitis since 2014. The New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services reports 3 people were infected and 2 died that year. Now, the family of 41-year-old Stephen Perry says he was sick for a week before he died. This deadly virus causes brain inflammation that can lead to severe neurological damage. Perry was hospitalized due to severe central nervous system disease. His family told CBS News that Perry was healthy and had no underlying conditions. There is no vaccine or treatment for the rare disease. So far this summer, Triple E has been found in 1 New Hampshire horse and 7 mosquito batches. CBS News medical contributor Dr. Celine Gounder says climate change is contributing to the rise of these mosquito-borne illnesses.
Well, climate change is creating the right breeding ground for mosquitoes. So you have hotter, more humid, longer summers, which means people are coming into contact with mosquitoes that much more, and so therefore mosquito-borne infections. What can we be doing? Well, the really most important thing is to be controlling the mosquitoes. So there are some traditional ways of doing that. You want to drain your standing water, you want to be spraying, and there are some newer technologies there to control mosquitoes that don't involve pesticides.
Okay.
Some of those are being piloted in places like the Florida Keys, where you have lots of mosquitoes.
Right.
But we still have a lot to go in terms of developing treatments or vaccines.
Health officials say Triple E can cause flu-like symptoms that can include fever, chills, muscle aches, and joint pain. Rest fluids and pain medicine might relieve some symptoms. After more than 260 successful SpaceX landings, the latest one ends in a fiery mishap. We're going to tell you what went wrong here as you see those flames erupt and then it tips over. We'll take you here next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. SpaceX shifted gears this morning after delaying the Polaris Dawn launch again due to weather issues. Meanwhile, it pressed ahead with plans for back-to-back launches of Starlink internet satellites, one from Florida, the other from California. But there were some issues in Florida after the first stage of the Falcon 9 actually toppled over after landing at sea. Joining me now for more on this is CBS News senior national correspondent Mark Strassman. Of course, Mark, when we say at sea, it's landing on essentially a floating barge, right? What happened?
Well, launch went off just perfectly. They were launching these Starlink internet satellites. So launch goes off perfectly. As you know, SpaceX uniquely, and this is a game changer, recovers its booster stage, generally by landing it on a recovery ship out in the Atlantic. In this case, it comes down, nose up just the way it's supposed to, and then just as it lands, it topples over. Not clear whether it toppled over into the Atlantic or not, because the video feed from SpaceX cut off at that point, but clearly something went wrong. Now, that said, SpaceX would still consider this to be a success for a couple of reasons. One, the Starlink satellites were successfully launched into orbit. And two, this was the 23rd time that SpaceX had used this booster stage, so they really got their money's worth out of it.
Yeah, certainly still a successful program pushing the envelope here of innovation. Let's talk about Polaris Dawn. What's happening there? Do we know when it will go?
Don't know when it's going to go. The issue with the launch actually has to do with the potential splashdown in 5 or 6 days after the launch. They need the weather in the Atlantic or the Gulf to be calm enough for a splashdown to happen. And right now, the forecast does not look good. So they're essentially waiting for the weather to clear. Out on the pad, it's just fine. But out in the Atlantic and in the Gulf, they just, again, they need the seas to be just a little bit calmer so that the splashdown will have every chance of success. The earliest it could happen, the new window would open on Friday. Not clear if that's too soon. The forecast apparently doesn't look great from here, but they're hoping to get it off at some point over Labor Day weekend.
You've been talking about it since Monday, but just in case somebody hasn't been watching CBS News 24/7 every day, I don't know why someone wouldn't be doing that, but can you please explain to us the significance of this mission?
Sure. It's an all-civilian crew. They're going to have the first ever all-civilian commercial spacewalk. The reason they are doing the spacewalk is to test these new redesigned space suits that SpaceX has engineered over the last few years. The space suits are necessary because SpaceX has this grand vision for interplanetary colonization, or at least interplanetary travel, and they will need hundreds, if not thousands, of these spacesuits to be fully functioning in order to do that. This is a baby step in that direction, but a significant step and a potentially risky step as well. So there could be some high drama. And Lisa, this is interesting. When they do it, SpaceX is going to live stream the moment so everybody can watch.
Sounds up our alley, Mark. Thanks so much. Well, the games in Paris are not done yet. We're going to take you to France for the kickoff of the Paralympics. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following. A Utah woman who wrote a children's book about grief after the death of her husband will now stand trial for his alleged murder. A judge ruled that prosecutors presented sufficient evidence for the case to proceed in front of a jury next year. 34-year-old Corey Richens is accused of poisoning her husband Eric in 2022 with a lethal dose of fentanyl. Prosecutors claim she also committed various types of financial fraud and mistakenly believed she was entitled to her husband's estate upon his death. Richens has pleaded not guilty to all charges. Drug maker Eli Lilly is slashing the price of its weight loss drug Zepbound. The company is going to sell single-use vials for a lower cost than the preloaded injector pen. Eli Lilly says they're also working to significantly expand supply amid skyrocketing demand. The single-use vials will only be available on the company's telehealth platform, Lilly Direct. A Colorado hiker is recovering after being stranded overnight on the mountain amid freezing rain and high winds. It happened last Friday during a work retreat. The man got separated from the group as they were climbing down the mountain. He tried descending the mountain alone but became disoriented because his coworkers had removed belongings used as trail markers as they hiked down. He then lost cell service when a storm hit, but he finally got signal the next morning and was able to call for help. The opening ceremony for the 2024 Paralympic Games in Paris gets underway tonight. More than 4,000 athletes from around the world will compete in 549 medal events. Sally Hurst with our media partners at BBC News has more.
Well, like the Olympics, tonight's Paralympic opening ceremony is going to be held outside of a stadium for the first time. Now, you may remember those pictures of the Olympic opening ceremony with the athletes going down the River Seine. It was chucking it down with rain, wasn't it? Well, we've got lots of sunshine here today in Paris. It promises to be a balmy evening, perfect lighting for those famous Parisian landmarks. Now, there will be about 50,000 spectators. It's promising to be quite a party. And in terms of tickets, organisers say they have sold around 2 million. Now, not every venue is full, some of them are, but they are hoping that when the Parisians come back from their traditional summer holiday, La Rentrée they call it here, they'll really get behind the Games, as they did the Olympics, and some of those ticket sales will increase again. So some stats for you now. There are 549 gold medals for grabs and 4,500 athletes from across the world. 168 competing delegations. That doesn't include 90 Russian athletes competing as neutrals and also 8 athletes from the refugee team. Now, the USA team are one of the biggest here at the Games. They finished 4th in the table at Rio and Tokyo. The talk here, though, is that they could just creep up that medal table a bit this time. Now, the sport starts tomorrow. There are gold medals on offer in cycling, swimming and para-taekwondo. Sally Hurst for CBS News in Paris.
Well, the scorching temperatures that many areas in the U.S. are facing also forced schools to close in Pennsylvania. CBS News Philadelphia reporter Ross DiMattei has a look at how residents there are handling this.
Another day of dangerous heat and humidity on tap here in Philadelphia today, and that's probably why we've seen so many fitness enthusiasts getting in an early morning workout here on the steps of the world-famous art museum, much like Rocky did back in the day. Take a look. We've seen a lot of runners, many of them taking it a little easier than they normally would, and also people walking up and down the steps as we brace for temperatures in the upper 90s. But it will feel even worse. It will feel like triple digits when you factor in the humidity. This heat has been brutal for several days, and it's taking a toll on our students and parents. Yesterday, thousands of kids were dismissed early because of excessive heat and inadequate cooling at schools, and that will be the case once again today. In 2021, the School District of Philadelphia launched plans to upgrade access to air conditioning, but 63 schools still lack the proper cooling. We spoke with a number of parents who acknowledged that air conditioning is necessary on days like today, but they also said that early dismissal forced a lot of them to cancel their plans or to leave work early, threw a wrench in their whole schedule. Now, if you're planning on spending any time outdoors today, whether it be to work out or just to run errands, you should drink plenty of water. Even when it feels like you're not thirsty, keep on drinking just to be safe. And if you start feeling sick or nauseous, that is a telltale sign to seek shelter right away so that you can cool down and avoid any heat-related illness.
Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore, who's not in front of the famed Rocky Steps, but close enough with another look at the forecast. Hey, Grant.
No, we sent Ross out into the heat. I'll stay here in the air-conditioned studio. But I will say, look, we're not alone here in Philadelphia. Even though we have this excessive heat warning, there are 55 million people underneath either that excessive heat warning or heat advisories from as far west as St. Louis all the way into the Northeast and really almost everywhere in between. Either forecast highs or actual high temperatures approaching the triple digits today. The Northeast gets a little bit of relief tomorrow, but still, it's been dangerously hot, especially back into the Midwestern states over the last couple of days. All of this heat and humidity fueling the threat for severe weather from the Ohio Valley all the way into portions of South Jersey as well as North and South Dakota, seeing a threat for severe weather today. Meanwhile, across the rest of the country, we actually have snow falling in portions of the Montana Rockies. Meanwhile, dry and pleasant over on the West Coast. Lindsay, back to you.
All right, Grant, appreciate it. Thank you so much. An encore of CBS Mornings is next. This is CBS News 24/7. Much more news throughout the morning and afternoon. Stay right here.